Alrighty, so we have a new piece of a new gear set that has come out. It is a previous set, but I figured I would still give some detailed information on whether or not I think it's worth spawning. It is really good looking. The Citadel gear, I love this defensive set. It looks really nice. Before we get into it, I wanted to go over the price. It is 75 to get a random newly added piece of gear, and it's going to be about 750, give or take, to be able to exchange for one of those. I always recommend rounding up by about 100. So if you're planning on spawning, have around 850 or more gems. It is also worth pointing out that we are getting a new collab coming this Wednesday. It is the Love Live selection. So there's going to be quite a few pieces here. We know for sure there's going to be a lot of different girls in that. But I figured let's talk about the actual spawn that we have. First, I'm going to go over I guess I'll start with the defensive gear first. I'll go over the weapons, and then lastly, I'll end with the weapon abilities. So let's start with the defensive gear. A lot of people get confused. This is obsidian. It is an obsidian proc. And these two, the reduces physical and reduces magical, those are both actually percentages. They're not the traditional damage down that reduces damage. And you can kind of tell because normal damage down gear, let's see if I can find a piece of gear, has it at the bottom, and it'll say it reduces the damage coming, and it usually doesn't have this type of text here at the top. It has like its own separate text that scales. This text doesn't scale. It's kind of hard to explain. I am going to reach out to Unison League, actually the A-team team, about this. This is a pretty big problem. It's really difficult to tell, but this is actually a percentage. And if you don't know, M is 20, plus means plus 5. So this is 25%. And so it's reducing magical and physical damage by 25%. That's a percentage. And it also increases status ailment resistance by quite a bit, and then applies an invulnerability for one hit. It stacks up to 3, so it's really easy to stack, and it is an L+. L+ is much lower than I would like it to be. But first, let's talk about PvE. This is not PvE gear, because even if you double proc, you're only reducing the incoming damage by 50%, and it is a percentage. So you are still going to be taking hits. Now, if you get hit with a percent move that drops your HP down to like 5%, and then you double proc this, you're probably still dead. Unless you have something like you uni and you have a bubble, or you have resurrection or miracle or something, you're probably still dead. So that's why I don't like this gear for PvE. I think for PvE, and the low proc rate is also pretty bad. Generally speaking, for PvE, damage reduction and damage reflection are more than sufficient. Add on top of that things like the why am I slipping? Things like ability power reduction. If you add on top of that ability power reduction, usually double procking or even single procking ability power reduction on the enemy monster is more than enough to sustain you. I don't like this. The invulnerability is good. You'll probably survive. Depends on how many times the enemy hits. Also, you have to keep in mind that some enemies will get certain types of penetration. It depends on the monster that you're fighting. So just some things to point out. I think these are fine, especially for new players. They're fine for PvE. But as you progress and you do really difficult PvE, you're going to want to get rid of these. So for that reason, I'm putting these solidly at a 5 or 6 out of 10. Even some, in my opinion at least, even some of the free-to-play defensive gear gives better procs than these against some quests. Again, it's kind of hit or miss, but I personally don't think that these are good enough, especially for new players. When you're really low, you have low gear score, you take more damage inherently, and your defensive procs are super valuable early on. They make all the difference. So I don't like them for PvE. Let's talk about PvP and guild battle. I'm going to start with guild battle first. If you're using this as a racing set, I think it's fine. It doesn't give you any uni, so it's not like optimal for racing, but it depends on the meta. For a long time, the meta was to snipe. The meta has kind of shifted away from sniping, but that doesn't necessarily mean that sniping is bad. And it also doesn't necessarily mean that it's not uncommon. It's still common, and being able to wipe with uni isn't as consistent as it might come across sometimes. So for that reason, I think that this is still very, very valuable. I would put this as like for specifically racing and guild battle, I'd put this solidly at a 7 out of 10. When we talk about backline monster or backline characters in PvP or guild battles, I'm gonna have them also connect to PvP. PvP and backline kind of guild members are kind of similar in the way that they will use this gear. And because this gear is kind of different than some of the other types of procs, it is really good right now, but I can see it easily fading very quickly. This gear is also super, super heavily skewed towards favoring specifically soldier. And the reason why is because percent damage downs stack. Soldiers can consistently keep around 50% damage reduction with things like Iron Fortress that gives 40%, along with stuff like Vigilance, which will also give some damage reduction. These are percent damage reductions. You can use things as well like Brave Introduction, and they will stack. So if you're double procking this gear with level 7, let's just say, usually level 7 will boost it up. Instead of it being 25%, it should be 30%, but I have not personally tested it. That's usually the trend. So let's assume that it's 35%. Or, sorry, not 35%, just 30%. If you double proc, that's 60% damage reduction. If you have used a single damage reduction ability, you're basically taking no damage. Even if the enemies have incredible buffs, they're going to have a really, really hard time killing you as a soldier. Now, as any other class, this is not necessarily the case. However, especially before they changed CP and HP to be much, much larger, now HP and CP are so massive that reducing your damage by 50% is massive. Even if 3 or 4 people attack you and you're double procking against pretty much all of them, with something like Resurrection, you're pretty likely to survive. And that is crazy. So, on the one hand, it is extremely, extremely powerful. But on the other hand, I foresee in the future, because this has happened multiple times, that attack will increase, magic attack will increase, and damage will increase along with it, to the point where these gears will probably be outscaled in a year. For sure, they're going to be gone. It could happen earlier, but they probably won't be super useful past a year. Because of that, it's kind of hard for me to permanently endorse these, especially with a low proc rate. However, if you're just jumping into PvP and you need some good defense gear, you want to be a top tier PvPer, these are really good for PvP. They are really good against both types, physical and magical, whereas usually you only have, like, the tiger procs, for example, are only good against a specific type of damage. So if you're missing out on some tiger procs or you just want some filler gear, this is actually pretty good gear, considering that the other ones, I believe, give you something like 45%. 45 plus 25%, that's pretty good. 70% damage reduction, that's not bad. So I like these gears. For PvP specifically, they are pretty gnarly. So when we're considering PvP and backline guild, I would say that these sit solidly at a 9 out of 10. Again, it depends on your class. For something like Soldier, in my opinion, these are 10 out of 10. But that's only if you're playing Soldier. If you flex to something like Morpher, for example, you don't have the same percent damage down that you can get. And those returns in exchange are not nearly as powerful. So yeah, I think these are great pieces of gear for both guild, like backline guild battle type carries that want to survive against being attacked, as well as PvP. These are solidly in the 9 out of 10 for basically all classes currently. Just be aware that in a year, these probably won't be nearly as good. They'll probably be like 7 out of 10. But yeah. And that's just because damage will scale. Right now, it's really, really hard to kill someone. Really hard to kill someone. And that's because of all the extra bonus HP that we just got. So this is kind of a temporary thing. But they are good pieces of gear, especially for PvP. Now, let's talk about the weapons. They max out on 7XL plus, which is the maximum right now, really good. Only need 3 pieces of gear, and they scale on Dark Element up to XL. So that's all really good. Also applies penetration through damage reduction and damage reflection. Exactly what you would want for a lot of your classes. Some classes don't require it, but many classes do. So you'll have to know which class. I'll explain that in just a second. Increases status ailment success value by 4XL plus. That is not that great, but the applies vital strikes. Dude, this is so good. I can't explain how good Vital Strikes is. It's basically an additional proc if you hit the 10% chance. With all of the hits that we're getting right now, especially if you're playing a character or like a class like Morpher and you're using something like Forbidden Temptation, which hits like 20 times, or you're using an Archer, which hits 10 times consistently, Vital Strikes is super valuable. Overall, this proc is amazing. Here, let me, I guess I'll talk about which classes benefit from it most after I talk about PvE. So for PvE, these are 10 out of 10 pieces of gear. Strictly when we're talking about like damage. And the Vital Strikes is what is pushing that. Yes, you are missing out on something like 15% additional damage, you're also missing out on some classes will need to have accuracy, but these do not have accuracy, and I still think that they are very, very good. Again, it kind of depends on the class. Some classes will not need these, and I'll go over that in a little bit. The penetration specifically, like, I wouldn't spawn these unless you need them for PvP. They are primarily PvP. Also, you don't want a ton of these. When I say they're 10 out of 10, you want a maximum of 3 of these. And the main reason is because they don't give something like cost. They don't give success value up. We kind of talked about that. It kind of depends on the class. Some classes don't need it. And additionally, I think that, yeah. So I guess I should clarify. For some classes, this will be like an 8 out of 10. For other classes, it'll be like a 10 out of 10. Mainly, we're looking at, does your ability hit 100% of the time? So here, let's take a look. The way that you can tell if your ability hits 100% of the time is whether or not it has words that say so. So for example, Lance Flash says it hits 5 times with physical using both attack and defense for a success value of 70. That is 70%. So you have a 70% chance to hit, you have a 30% chance to miss. For something like a Lancer, this would not be good, because one of your primary damage dealing abilities in Lance Flash requires additional success value. For a class like Soldier, on the other hand, if you're using something like Blooming Blackout, you have 100% success value. If you're using Indomitable Winter, you have an 80% success value. So that's not as good. If you're using, like in PvP, if you're using, where is Crystal Blade, Glistening? This one, there's no, you hit 100% of the time. So this is what we're looking for. Let me just, we're jumping ahead to the PvP section. When I talk about whether or not your specific class needs this type of weapon for PvP or for guild battles when you're trying to kill people, this is what I'm talking about. You want to see something that penetrates nullification and invulnerability. And the reason why is because these procs here penetrate damage reduction and damage reflection. Now, there's only 4 main types of ways to reduce damage. There's damage reduction and damage reflection, and then there's invulnerability and nullification. If you're using an ability that ignores nullification and invulnerability and you proc this, reducing damage reflection and damage reduction, you're ignoring all of the primary types of damage. The only thing that can stop you is percent damage and ability power down. Those are the only things that can slow down the damage that you're pumping out. So that's what you're looking for. Now, there are many, many classes, so I'm not going to go over them all. When you're looking at your classes, for example, we'll go to Soldier. You're looking for specifically words that say penetrates nullification and invulnerability. Now, I've made a PvP guide, so I would recommend checking that out for more details. But this is what you're generally looking for. You're also requiring 100% activation rate. The reason why is because there are abilities that do that. For example, I believe this one. Yeah, so like for example, this one penetrates nullification and invulnerability, but it has a success value of 70, which means that if you proc this, you're not going to be hitting because it doesn't have a percent. It doesn't have something that increases success value. So that's what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about specifically whether or not this is good, and it fluctuates between, in my opinion, an 8 to a 10. Kind of depends on your class, and it depends on the abilities that you're using as well. Obviously, in some cases, this could be a much worse ability, like 8, for example. You're still getting vital strikes, you're still going to be able to hit them, you're still getting the penetration and really excellent damage with a good proc rate. But in order for this to be like a 10 out of 10, it really depends on your class. So I guess my original jump to a 10 was like, it was the best possible instance is what I was thinking for. But realistically, it kind of depends on the class. So those are what you're looking for, essentially. I hope that makes sense. Now, let's look at the weapons themselves. Each of them has a specific weapon ability. All of them are revolving around decreasing uni gauge. I'm pretty sure all of them have 15% cooldown and 15 cost. So let's talk about the cooldown and the cost first. The cooldown is massive. This is a huge investment ability. Having 15 cost and 15 second cooldown, that's just bad. So these abilities must be extremely powerful in order to justify this price. So one enemy decreases Unison gauge by 10 and provokes for 5 seconds. It's starting off pretty bad. If we compare that ability to most classes, when you're talking about provokes, generally speaking, you'll have something like you're comparing it to the provoking class, which is soldier. This one costs 5, has a cooldown of 10, provokes 3 enemies for the same duration, and reduces your incoming damage by 30%. So when I'm comparing it to abilities, this is what I'm comparing it to. This right here is hot garbage. The decreases Unison gauge by 10 is not that great, just because we can get 100% uni reduction. So this is only doing something if the enemies are either bad, like they haven't set up for it, or you have used specific abilities, like, for example, diminishment. Where's diminishment? This one. That amplifies Unison gauge reduction effects so that they can still get hit. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about using 15 uni to reduce, or 15 cost, 15 cost to reduce 10 uni and provoke. That's what I'm comparing it to. Pretty bad. This doesn't change my opinion of the axe at all. I think this is pretty garbage. Let's move on. Quiver. Quiver is actually quite interesting. The quiver effect prevents you from being able to target anyone but yourself. You can still use area of effect abilities. So, for example, effects that hit your entire team will still hit your entire team. So it doesn't prevent everything, but it is kind of interesting. This is a super niche thing, and historically only Lancers have been able to apply this. Because this isn't locked to a specific class, if you have this, you can put it on any class. So for that example, I actually really like this ability. This ability, I think, is one of the only ones that's actually worth it. And it is extremely niche. You will have to specifically prepare or be trying to counter something specific, but I love this just because it is super rare, and rare things usually win guild battles. People don't think about the rare things. They only think about the super common things, generally speaking. So if you're going up against a specific guild battle, guild team and you know what you're doing, or you're trying to counter something super specific, I like having this as a backup ability. It can really, really mess up somebody if they're trying to heal an ally. It can completely disrupt that, and it's a single target, especially with slight aside. We're talking about morphers more and more because they're popping up everywhere in guild battles, and I think morphers are top tier, but they generally can only heal themselves in the unmorphed state, which is also where you find things like Courageous Shout. So there is some justification. Maybe this is good enough that it could be used in some situations. Let's look at the gun. Pressure state. Ooh, this is a good one. Pressure state is quite rare. However, the 5 seconds sucks, and the success value also sucks. The only saving grace here is that pressure state's really, really hard to get resistance for. So generally speaking, you're going up against base resistance. However, with so many uni chains being able to go off, there are so many chances that the enemy will probably uni and then swap. The likelihood that they're stuck is really, really low. However, it is worth pointing out that there are specific strategies that used to be employed a lot, which shut down the enemies from being able to move. You hit them with things like insanity, rejection, you steal all their cost, you steal all their uni. They can't do anything. And then if you get something like AoE, or you hit them with pressure state so that they can't swap out, this could be a nice way of applying an AoE pressure state if you get something like diffusion. So in super niche situations, it's good, but I generally think this is pretty bad. I don't think most situations it'll actually be useful. This one, super easy to talk about, garbage. Next one. Jealousy state. Nullifies Unison gauge fills from abilities or Unison effects one time. This is the only one that I think could be consistently worth it. If you have, for example, if you have a cleric, or if you have anyone on the front line, really, for that matter, who has more than enough cost, and you're trying to specifically prevent one of their treasure hunters from racing, this is an amazing backup ability. It hits 100% of the time because there's no chance of them being able to build resistance. It is a debuff. And because it is a debuff, you just use the ability. You're most likely not reducing their Unison gauge, but if they apply something like Cheer, Courageous Shout, the new Morpher ability that's like Shining something, this one, Heroic Assist, that boosts 5, excuse me, and then 7. When you're using these abilities, that is massive. That is massive. If you have 3 people use this on the same guy, there's no shot that he's getting uni. Like, you will win the race for sure. So in some instances, I think this is meta defining. However, do I think that this will actually shift the meta? No. There have been a multitude of incredible weapon abilities that have come out, and nobody capitalizes on them. Nobody forces their guild to spawn them in mass and then actually use them in strats. And it is so frustrating because this isn't the only ability that's come out that's been like, oh my gosh, that's insane. But people don't get it. So I most likely won't get this, even though I'm screaming to the rooftop that it is really good. If you're spawning this though, my suggestion is that you should get at least one of these books if you care about frontline. If this is not a racing ability, it's just a frontline ability that is quite good. Let's talk about the next one. This one decreases Unison gauge by 2 for 5. I just don't think that's worth it. You're only targeting one enemy. It costs 15. I just can't. I cannot endorse this ability. Even with something like dual attack, you can still use it twice, but that's 30 cost. I just can't get over the cost, man. Like, the cost is too much. This one I understand. You dual attack this one on something like a cleric or maybe even a treasure hunter. You could even put this on something like a rook, man. Like that, like a frontline rook who opens EE, Rumble Whisper on one of their racers so that they guaranteed cannot get the race. And you're only going up against one of the other racers. You can throw this on something else. But if you have like a frontline rook, this is something that they can actually do. And then if they get off the uni, you can throw something like DS and you can protect your team. And you, like, there's a whole thing, right? And I can actually see this being incredibly good. For 30 cost, this one's not it. So those are my opinions. Overall, I think that this spawn, if we're talking about for new players, for free-to-play players, if you're wanting to get into PvP, if you're playing specific classes that heavily rely on things like nullification and invulnerability, and you do not require additional accuracy, these are amazing to spawn. If you're playing a class like, for example, Lancer, which has some of the most atrocious accuracy in the entire game, like this, or if you're actually trying to kill people with something like Riot Break, has like 80%. There's another one here, Rage. I guess this one has 90%, but this one also damage reduction and damage reflection. So you want something that doesn't have damage reduction, damage reflection. So if that's the case, if you're using, like, some classes just can't use this straight up, just ignore it. But if you're playing a class like Soldier that can really, really benefit from this, 10 out of 10 would spawn absolutely if you want to get into PvP and guild battle content for killing and being aggressive. For all the other classes, I would say ignore this spawn, especially as a free-to-play player and a new player. We're moving into a collab. And collabs in general have incredible monsters, and you can't get them afterwards. So I would personally recommend to be patient. I promise there will be good things. As a new player, as a free-to-play player, monsters are better. You only need 2 or 3 good monsters, and then you can focus on all of the rest of it. If you're wanting good defensive gear, again, if you're playing a Soldier, these are incredible. For all the other classes, they are an excellent start, but they're not the end-all, be-all when it comes to defensive gear in PvP. So just keep that in mind. They're good. They're not your final destination. Would I recommend spawning this for specific players that are wanting guild battle content, stuff like this? Is it worth spawning for specifically this? No. But it is really, really good and arguably worth getting. So that's my 2 cents on it. These are good weapons. They're super easy to proc, and the Vital Strikes is very, very good. The status ailment is not necessary, but the penetration is really good. So hopefully this has been an in-depth guide enough to help you make a good decision. If you have any questions, please ask them about specific classes, and I can answer them in the comments below. I will catch you guys later.